Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Budget Committee meeting of February 8th. Let me know that Joan Ensign, Mark Hetzel are here. Jack Heineman will be here via Zoom later in the meeting, I believe.
I
or not at all.
So. I don't
okay,
know, yeah.
But we do have a quorum. Approval of the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second, so that approves. I don't believe there's any public comments. And so let us move to item number 1, the 22-23 budget update, end of the year balance projection. Steve.
All right, thank you, Mark. So the first thing under this item is the committee asked at last month's meeting to explore a little bit more our natural gas purchasing process. Our vendor rep wasn't available with the date that we selected for this meeting, so we will circle back to him once we schedule the next meeting. It's more of a longer term discussion really for next winter at this point anyways, so we will invite him back to a future meeting. The other thing that's noted at the top part of this agenda item, just
Steve,
something
before we go to that, on the second chart for the natural gas, I was just confused by what is said.
the PDF one, or the first one, or the second one?
The PDF one.
Okay.
In the second grid from January on down, it says November is 0.619 and December is 0.612, but then when you go below that to the MGI price in November, December, it's a different price. Are those two different sources of energy?
Sure. Yep, I see what you're saying. So that box with the MG&E pricing is there as a reference point. So as an example, if you're a consumer with a residential home,
okay,
and are required to purchase from MG&E, that would have been the rate that you would have seen on your home.
okay,
Because we are a very large consumer, we have the ability to purchase natural gas directly through an alternative program.
okay.
So if you look at December as an example of 22, we were at 0.612.
Yeah.
While if you would have been a MG&E, at home, it would have been 0.876.
Okay.
That does highlight the value of why we purchase natural gas on our own. So just that's what that does.
All right.
Hey, Brian. And so we will have him back at a future meeting. The top portion of that agenda item references a couple of things. We have the $100,000 contingency this year. The only expenditure that the board has approved out of that fund was a request from Tiffany Loken to add a special ed teacher at Heritage. So that's been the only budget issue that to this date has come forward that the board has used contingency. We talked a little bit about the additional $1 million that was approved through the operational referendum question. At this point, the school board has not approved any expenditures related to the $1 million. We did talk a few meetings ago about some of the expenditures that were removed from the 22-23 budget that at some point we will want this committee to weigh in on. An example of that is our post-employment benefit contribution, which could be upwards of $700,000 depending on what this committee decides to do. Another issue I know that Brian wants to talk about with the HR committee is compensation for staff who are below the average for their category. In particular, some teachers due to changes in our practices for hire and overtime. So I know Brian wants to bring forward that conversation as well, which could still be a 22-23 conversation. And if it is, it would be out of the, the $1 million that we have not allocated. But that's generally where we're at this point for 22-23. Does anyone have any questions? Or Brian, do you want to comment at all about timing or when you want to have that discussion?
Yeah, actually, the timing would match up well with this initial conversation because we have to submit that data to the state and then also to a consortium where we work with Forecast 5. And it actually that data that will really allow us to best compare internal and external data is getting released today. And so I'll be prepared, even within the next month to really have an informed place where we stand internally and externally for not just salaried or certified individuals, but also as we look at hourly employment groups, because there are some, at least last year, there was some indications that we really needed to address some areas there as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions under this agenda item? All right, Rebecca, if you want to move to the next one. So jumping into 23-24 planning, Rebecca, would you mind describing the timeline for a moment? So in February, we are presenting the budget planning process to the committee. You do see in March that we are then presenting it to the school board for approval. So just so you have a reference as to where we're at in the process on the timeline. So you've seen a first draft of the budget planning process actually at the last meeting as well. But just for a frame of reference, the intent is to review that again today. Take any feedback that you have as committee members or the rest of the board, incorporate that into the second draft, and then seek approval by the board at the March meeting. You can bounce back, Rebecca.
Before you leave, there was a segment for April 24 with the board and the leadership team. Is that just the administrative leadership team? Because last time we didn't do that because we hadn't finished negotiations with the union.
Right, and Tim has asked that question as well as to whether or not we're going to do that. So that's been a placeholder. Okay. For things that are meetings that we've had in the past. And I guess at this point, we'll have to evaluate that and kind of the timing of how everything comes together and how we see that meeting potentially going. And at this point, we haven't committed to it, okay, but it's just down there as a placeholder.
Okay, thank you.
So for the budget planning process, last month you had the opportunity to take a look at it. The item that we spent the most time requesting feedback on was the first grade class size at Prairie Elementary. So this committee took that back to the full board. There was a discussion about adding in the additional first grade section. The feedback from the board was to make that change. So Allie and I have updated the budget planning process to include that information. The one thing that I know this committee asked for more information on, because the process that Allie and I prepare only presents very, very high level information on the middle school and the high school. You asked for information from Tim. So last year, Tim shared a deeper dive into class size information, and you requested to have that again this year. So we have attached it. And Tim, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to ask you to give the committee a overview of the data that you've seen and any thoughts that you want to share with folks about what this is telling us.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
It's a third attachment.
It's the
Rebecca.
third, yeah, Rebecca, you can just bring that up. So what this does is this takes us, last year you saw the first 2 years. And so what we're trying to do here is show you where we were a little over a decade ago. So you've got a sense of long-term change. And then we'll keep a few annual series going, and we may need to update that 10-year back at some point. But right now I think it fits. And so as you go through this, there's some charts, kind of a visual piece. The most recent years in kind of a bright orange, you can kind of see the change pop a little better. And then there's a table. And so what you can see is, again, and these are the average class sizes. And so you can see in the areas where we are working with our lab courses, you see it for biology and chemistry, and then some of our students that need additional support, which in our model would be algebra. You can see we've been pretty successful keeping those class sizes at a pretty reasonable level, particularly in algebra. And as you look at some of the other classes, you can see that either we were up and we've stayed up over where we were a decade plus ago, or we've come up over time. And so then if we go down to the next one, you can actually see the tables and for each of what I would call our core 9th and 10th grade courses at the high school. And it's important to recognize the average is just an average. So within this, we have some ranges. So this would be English 9 ranging from 20 to 25. Please, Rebecca. English 10, 21 to 26. World History, 21 to 28. Now we offer both, our US history is both our local US history and AP US history. So I average the two for the chart, but I unpack them for the table. So you can see that our local US history ranges 17 to 28, APUSH 26 to 28. And again, this is typically, social studies has typically been some of our higher class sizes over time. Biology, 18 to 24. 24 is our cap by policy, and really how the furniture is set up in these classrooms too. Chemistry is 17 to 23. And then we get down to algebra, 14 to 21. We've really, made a concerted effort in recent years to keep algebra lower because our on pace is geometry. These are students we already know perhaps could use a little additional support in math, even if they're not in algebra workshop. Plus it's the 9th grade transition year, which for some kids is also a time where a little extra contact is always a good thing. We go down, we see geometry. Again, this is our on-pace course, so our numbers are coming up, 21 to 26. Then we have advanced algebra, which is our on-pace 10th grade course, 21 to 28. We go down a little bit more, we get into middle school. Now, the middle school, the class sizes move much more in lockstep because we're teamed there. And so where you see differences in a grade level between the average section size, I should say, between any of these, what you're really seeing there is small differences at the edges where students might be pulled out for special ed in that area versus being fully included. And so we are more likely to fully include students in social studies and science. And I want to emphasize the vast majority of our students with disabilities are fully included. But occasionally for literacy and mathematics, there are a few that are pulled out. So as we go down, you can see language arts 7. There's a big range. So the average is 22, but the actual sections have a lot of range. And that's driven by whether students are in things like band, what their electives are, things of that nature. But again, you can see that the average, and this is not a new phenomenon. You go back a decade and you can see we're seeing this swinginess range in schedule as well. Language arts 8 should be next. 14 to 26. Social studies 7, 16 to 28. Social studies 8. I inverted that. Sorry about that. It's actually 17, 13 to 27. Science, very similar, and you're going to see similar things all the way through, for the ranges, because these things will echo through, and I have no idea why I transposed the 8th grade numbers. I really apologize for that. Going down to math, though, we do level out a bit. This is like 11th grade social, 10th grade social studies at the high school. So you see an average for 7th and 8th grade math, but then this shows kind of where the numbers are coming in. The algebra and the pre-algebra for 8th grade. And again, you're seeing the range. Pre-algebra is the course for students that need who aren't quite ready for algebra, so those sizes are a little lower. And you may be asking yourself, why do we see a greater range at the middle school than we do at the high school? And it's the teaming. So one thing teaming gives us is you've got a set of 4 teachers who are all working with the same set of students. They know them well, but that means when we're looking to place a student in a science section, for example, there are 5 periods where they could go. And if we didn't team at the middle school, that would mean you might have 10 or 12 places where they could go. That would be very much like the high school. And you would see those numbers smooth in, but then you'd lose the benefit of the teams and small groups knowing their students. So as long as we have things outside the core team schedule with our electives and things like music, which we are going to have, that is going to drive greater disparities in the schedule. Any questions on this?
No, but I do appreciate having this information too.
Thank you very much.
Could I ask a question, Tim?
Yes.
So if facilities weren't an issue, let's just say we were about to open a high school campus, so there was space there, and they were about to move into a middle school. Is there something that you see here that you'd be putting a proposal on the table for consideration?
So if space were not an issue, I think when we look at literacy and having more contact with students in our English courses, being able to provide better opportunities for feedback on writing. All of these courses are important. All courses benefit from smaller class sizes, but if I were to think about one thing that might have the biggest impact on student learning that we could look at, would be to have a conversation, maybe not about the upper electives for English, but for the 9th and 10th grade English courses at the high school, have a conversation about getting those class sizes down more where we're seeing the science and the math. That would, I think, allow for better feedback on things like writing, maybe a little more ease for teachers to differentiate. It'd probably take 1 or 2 FTE to do it, which doesn't sound like a lot, but we're getting very full. Another thing you're not seeing in here that you may see a request come through at the middle school. Jeff and I are still having a conversation. We are kind of monitoring our need for reading support. And even though we really don't have a good space at the middle school, we still may need to bring a proposal forward. We're still evaluating that.
Okay. I can add to that. One of the things, and I'll bring Jeff Keenis into one of our board meetings, is this summer there's going to be some time set aside to kind of do a little deeper dive into schedule at the high school. How do we schedule our classes? I mean, you kind of look at the high schools, got their block over 2 days, got the A and B day schedule. Middle school has something similar, but they have those 40-minute or 42-minute classes. And part of what they're looking at is how can we restructure some of our holiday schedule. So there's some concerted time going to be put together this summer to try to look at that and then start moving those things forward. But there was a plan. I think this was a question out from one of the board members that I'm not sure if it was offline or if it was at one of the meetings, but I'll I think it'd be probably prudent to bring Jeff in at some point just to talk to a little bit about his why he wants to look at that. And it's a piece that Tim and I are very much in favor of and have been kind of supportive of. So that's a piece that may impact us over time as we kind of look at just how we structure those days.
Yeah, I mean, to just add to that, you may remember, and it's really now pushing on more like 8 years ago. We worked with a national resource, Michael Reddick. He came in and worked with us in our elementary and intermediate school schedules. He had worked with the high school back in the 90s during the block transition. He's still active. And so we are looking to bring him in as part of what Randy referenced this August to work with the middle school on there. So.
All right, thank you, Tim.
Don't go away.
Okay.
Are we done with this part or with staffing?
Yep, unless you had any further
I
questions.
guess, one thing I wondered, because at the last curriculum meeting, we heard from the EL department and, if I understood correctly, they were talking about hiring 2 reading teachers and 2 paras to facilitate change of instruction. That isn't budget 1, and I'm wondering if it should be, at least as a placeholder till it's approved.
I think the first thing is that plan hasn't been approved by the board yet. So
Right.
that comes on Monday.
Okay.
So once I think that is viewed by the full board and then the input is provided by the board, then we can add that into subsequent.
So just to share with you what Ally and I have not yet added in to this budget planning process is revenues from the topic of transfer service. So we know we have revenues available that we have not yet included in this process. The main reason for that is we knew this discussion was occurring and want to be able to bring forward revenues that would match with adding this program. So we made some decisions last fall with transfer service funds, which you can file last fall or this upcoming fall to save them. And so we will be presenting that together. So yes, Mark, we will want to update this process once Ally and I have a chance to see what that final proposal looks like. And then our goal is going to be to match that with revenues coming in through this transfer service program. So it will not affect the other activities we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you.
And your feedback from the curriculum committee meeting last week was really helpful. Lisa's.
I have one additional question. This program will transfer the Prairie students that say yes. If we have any students at Arboretum, even though that school by size doesn't meet the criteria, could any Arboretum kids transfer over if they want to?
So that's a question I think is better left to Lisa, who can give you the 100% accurate answer for that.
Okay.
I think I know the answer, but you're going to have Lisa in front of you in a few days. But I'll make sure we take this back to her and she'll be able to answer that very clearly Monday night.
Yeah, sure. Bill will articulate kind of what, because you're still going to have to run kind of the type of program we have in the non-targeted schools, because there may be some kids that don't transfer over.
Right.
But she can, I agree with Tim, let her answer that. She can do it fully as far as what that would be, so that as that goes out to the public, it's 100% happening.
Okay.
And the staffing piece we've just been discussing based on your feedback from the curriculum committee meeting, that's presented a little differently. We've added, well, I should say Lisa and Pam are doing all the great work on this, but they've updated the presentation to touch on that very specifically for you Monday night.
Thank you. Rebecca, would you mind opening the top PDF right there, please? And if you wouldn't mind going, you can go to the very last page in there. So what I mentioned earlier is we updated this document based on board feedback to add the first grade position at Prairie. I can keep going all the way down, right there, that table right there, yep. So at a high level, I just want to remind everybody what we are putting into this planning process. The planning process for 23-24 shows in the middle, you see the line that says surplus or deficit, shows a positive balance of $60,799. But it's important to know what goes into this to get to that balance scenario. And what we've put into this process is the enrollment growth that you've already seen, the staffing information and class size section that you've seen. But the big estimate is the increase in state funding for public schools. So we've put into this process an assumption that the revenue limit would increase by $200 per student, and state special education categorical aid would change from 30% to 35% over 2 years. Those numbers are well short of what the governor is intending to request. So it's important to keep in mind that in the event that the governor's public school proposal were to be adopted, the revenues identified on this document are much lower than what they would actually be. Now, the flip side would be true as well. If a state budget ended up happening at zeros again, or a lower amount like 100, then the revenues identified on this document are too high. So it's very, very important that we monitor what happens throughout the spring and evaluate that state budget process to see where we are going to be able to go with the revenue line, which then obviously impacts our most significant expenditure, which is salary and benefits.
Steve, what did you say you used for the special ed funding?
We increased the funding from 30% to 35%, but the governor has indicated his request is to go from 30% to 60% over 2 years, which is a significant increase in revenue. So if it ends up even close to that, it's a pretty significant change. We're going to talk in just a minute about health insurance and where that process is at. This document includes an estimate of a 3% additional investment in health insurance. Again, it doesn't have to be that, it's just what this document includes. And then to be able to get this hypothetical scenario to balance, wages would be able to increase by 7.5%, which is important to note. That is less than the CPI, which is 8.01% as of July 1st. So all schools are going to be watching that budget process as it plays out this spring. Allie and I will continue to update this as we learn more. I think it's fair to say the crux of the state budget discussions this spring are going to be the governor's requested investment in public schools and the legislature's request for a tax cut, and whether or not there will be a balance between the two that can be discussed. But I feel like we've got what would be viewed as a reasonable estimate at this time, and this is what that would look like. Otherwise, you saw the rest of this a month ago, but I'd be happy to jump to any parts of it if anybody had any questions. If not, Rebecca, you can bounce out of this. And we can go down to the next part of this, which is health insurance planning. I do want to point out a couple things. The HR committee will be discussing this tomorrow, but this is more from the lens of how this fits into budget planning. The insurance committee had a chance to meet and review the results of a staff survey. The committee members had a discussion over which health insurance plan option lined up the closest with the results of the survey that we saw, which for the insurance committee documents was something called Plan Y. Plan Y included an additional 3% district investment into the health insurance premium. It's important to note that will be the first increase in health insurance premiums since the 5-year agreement with Dean Health Plan was reached. So potentially that would mean if this ends up being approved, we would only really have invested 3% over 6 years, which is unheard of really in the health insurance industry. So it would be fair to say our long-term program has been very successful. But we do want to point out that Plan Y does include 2 changes. One is a new plan option, which I know the HR committee will look at tomorrow. And the traditional option, it does include a significant increase in co-pays and deductibles to keep the investment at the 3% level. So the committee is discussing strategies as well as to how we could mitigate that impact for staff, and that's part of the continuing discussions. But from the budget committee end, I just wanted to share that the plan that is currently being evaluated has a 3% investment. That 3% investment certainly does fit in with the projections that we have. And then Brian tomorrow will have a chance to review this with the HR committee.
So that includes the incentive to participate in the wellness program more completely.
Right, so Mark's question is about the incentive to participate. Brian, you want to come up and tackle that?
Well, he's coming up. Steve, when you budget health care, do you include the cost of the clinic in your budgeting, and has the expenditures to maintain that clinic gone up over this 5-year period, and where does that fit into the budget?
Sure, great question. So the clinic itself is budgeted separately because it's a purchase service and not an employee benefit. But as time has gone on, the clinic costs in total have been comparable. Now, to get that, because we were presented with an increase in the cost of the clinic, we changed the staffing levels. That they went from 1.0s down to less than 1.0 to balance out our goal of keeping the cost consistent. So the clinic's total costs are overall very consistent with when it first opened, but the staffing has been reduced a bit from where it was when it first opened. Feel free to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what, our goal for the clinic is to continue to encourage staff to use it. And I think we're doing some really positive things in that regard. We've opened it and the board opened it in availability to all staff at, started this year. This year, all of our health assessments are occurring there with the health clinic staff. And we're getting feedback that staff are really appreciating and enjoying the interactions with Sarah, the provider. And so I think that's going to continue to push traffic in that direction. I think it's a fair statement to say that our goal is to continue to increase the usage there to the point where we need to increase the amount of staff or staffing, because we have some room to take them from part-time to full-time. But yeah, I think we're making some positive steps to really continue use. And frankly, the plan changes that are proposed here would also likely really encourage staff to use that regardless of whether they go a traditional path or the new HSA high deductible option, because there's a tremendous cost savings to them by going to the clinic for everything. It's free. They're free to see those folks. There's no copay, no deductible for a traditional health plan.
Any comments you want to make on kind of the investment and where the process is at?
Yeah, I would say I'm very thankful to the committee. We've been working on that for a good chunk of the school year here. And, first coming to what potential plan changes could be to get us to the budgetary contribution that the district's going to make. And then, we feel like we got a really solid amount of feedback from staff. Joan, do you remember, was it 86% participation in the survey? It was really high. Yeah, and so we said that to everyone whose position in the district and hours make them eligible to receive insurance. Got a tremendous response rate, and the feedback that we were provided led us to this direction. And we recognize, again, it is a change, and we would all prefer there not to be a change, but the reality, as Stephen said, is that around us, districts have been having to contribute quite a bit more per year than even 3% over 6 years. And so when it is unheard of, that is absolutely unheard of. I mean, other districts would love to be in the position that we are in and have been in to this point. And so, we're hopeful, as Steve said, that while there is going to be increased costs, some things that we've already done, which you, Mark, mentioned, which is the opportunity for staff to take the final step and take the recommendations, is again a way for them to put some of that money back into their pocket, if you will. We're also going to see some of the other things that we offer in terms of other insurances and education. For example, like about the Best Flex plan, how we can get a higher staff participation in that if they go into the traditional plan to take money out pre-tax to mitigate changes in costs. And so while it is going to be a change, we do feel like we can help staff manage it financially. And frankly, the other aspect of it is that as we make these changes, this is a compensation package, right? And wages are incredibly important to staff, and research would say more important actually in terms of attraction and retention. And that allows us, these changes will allow us to put a lot of attention and action to our wages. And so that's we do feel as a committee and as an HR director, I feel like we're putting forward a plan that is good for the district and is going to be ultimately good for our employees as well.
I just really appreciate, Brian, your leadership in this and the timing. I never felt rushed through the process. So frequently when we have an insurance change or benefit adjustment, it always feels so rushed, and it's coming when teachers are trying to end their school year. I mean, the timing is so much more comfortable, and the options, nobody likes to see increases in these benefits, but there's such a transfer. They can get the same care, I think, without investing a lot of extra money if they take advantage of things. So I really feel you've done such a wonderful job leading us. So thank you.
Any other questions or feedback on that item? Otherwise, we can jump into the next one. So Randy has asked that both the budget and HR committees, and I know other committees are working on this as well. Circle back to the DEI ad hoc recommendations from the lens of budget planning and planning for any potential additional investments that ultimately the board would like to see to meet some of those recommendations. For the budget committee, there were some recommendations identified for that committee to review. But then in addition to that, the budget committee needs to keep our eye on anything else that is being discussed that would result in additional investments. Rebecca, would you mind opening that for a moment? And I'll give you just an example of one on there. If you can go to the slide down a little bit further. Keep going right there. So the one that is in the middle of the screen is one that would be reviewed at the HR committee. So the committee's listed in the middle, but ultimately impacts the work of the budget committee, because in order to accomplish a goal like that, we do have to invest additional resources in the HR department. So as Brian knows, the HR department has actually a very small budget overall for publishing, software, consultants, etc. And in order to accomplish multiple of the goals that are listed here under HR, it would require more investment. So as the process moves forward, and as the various committees take a look at these recommendations, in the end, it'll have to weave into the budget process so that we would be able to accomplish these goals. I mean, if you look at the far right as an example, just this, what appears to be a small item on there, attend job fairs in more diverse locations. That is an investment, right? That means attending job fairs in other states. That means investments in hotel, travel, tables, purchasing tables, etc. And in order to accomplish some of these objectives, the HR budget would have to be bigger than it is today. So it's just something to keep in mind that as these things are discussed, and I know there's discussions going on with the board, DEI committee, other committees as well. As these move forward, they have to be lined up with resources in order to be successful. So it's just something for all of us to keep our eye on as this process moves forward. There are a few, Rebecca, if you want to just scroll to the ones that say budget in that middle column. There's a few of them that were assigned specifically to budget. One of them was regarding fee waivers. Joan, you sit on the Student Financial Assistance Fund. That fund continues to make great progress and is continuing to evaluate proactive measures to work with students. The fund was initially set up as parents needing to be proactive, needing to reach out to access the funds. We have been slowly moving more towards a proactive approach, which is if you qualify, let's say for free or reduced, you then are eligible for A, B, C, and D without having to have parents reach out to Terry to make requests. And so the committee continues to go down that path of evaluating what are those opportunities to define programs for low-income students that they can just automatically participate in. You see ACT, prep as an example, or retaking the exam. And so the committee, I would say, is making progress on this topic and is continuing to move along that path.
Yeah, can I just add for Mark's benefit? the committee is made up of a variety of people, but it's really settling into the social workers and possibly the assistant principals in the buildings. And they are such advocates, and they really know not only the individual students, but you know, any events that are coming up that students may be excluding themselves from because they don't even want to enter into the arena of signing up because they know they don't have the resources. The social workers are amazing. They advocate and they bring it to the committee, and even before those signups become available, they've already inserted a program to take that off their plate. So it's an amazing group of people who advocate for these kids.
Thank you, Joan. And then there's a couple others on here. Those topics really revolve around input into the budgeting process. Very similar. The first one is current educators and administrators having opportunities to participate. The second one is engaging our staff and opportunities for allocating resources. As you know, this committee advocated for the 3-year budgeting process that we put in place last year. We have an update that we are sharing. It's in the packet for this meeting, but we're continuing to work on it. I would definitely say that at the administrative level, we have a good process where administrators feel that they can line up their requests. We probably need additional work at the staff level. So I would say that's something that we need to work on. How does this process engage with staff? I think some buildings have engaged more than others, and I think we need to put a structure in place. So that's an area that we would need to work on. But in general, I just wanted to put this on the agenda to state that as we move forward with our budget process this spring, just like this committee needs to keep our eye on what's happening with the EL program changes, we need to keep our eye on whatever's happening in this discussion so that we can get to the point of prioritizing additional investments where they're needed. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right, Rebecca, can you jump out of this one? So for this agenda item, we have a guest who's joining us via Zoom. So in the corner, you see Brett Whedon from PMA. Joan, you and Mark both met Brett at the School Board Association convention in January. So Brett works with PMA Financial Network, and he's here to talk to us today about a program called Bond Proceeds Management. And that is something Brett is directly responsible for. And Brett's going to talk about what that program means, and then he's going to share his screen to give some information as far as what he's seeing in the market today on this topic. And then we have feedback. We're going to request feedback from the committee on what your thoughts are regarding some of the local banks and what they put in for requests and how you see that fitting in our process. So Brett.
Thanks, Steve. Can everybody hear me first off?
Loud and clear.
Yep.
All right, great. Appreciate the kind words and the introduction, Steve, and thank you, members of the committee, for allowing me to join you here this morning, albeit virtually. To Steve's earlier point, yes, I work with PMA. I've been working with PMA for, gosh, a little over 18 years now, and have known Steve for much of that time. So just wanted to give a brief overview of, Steve mentioned, how we intersect with the district and other public entities across the state as we work with bond proceeds management. So for the district, as you all know, $99 million closed here on February 1st. And with bond proceeds management, we are certainly looking to incorporate an investment plan, working as municipal advisors, working hand in hand with the district to accomplish really two things. First and foremost is really generating interest earnings in that investment strategy. And within that, and I'll get to this, but certainly sharing in local involvement with your local financial institutions, and then also working with state statute allowable investment vehicles for public fund investing. So that's really one component. The second component really focuses on arbitrage. We can get off into the weeds with that, but it's certainly, I guess you could say, in vogue in today's day and age, and it has become more of a factor in the wake of the Fed's path of increased interest earnings and their interest rate path. So as many of you probably know, we currently live in a world where you could get between 4.5 to 4.75 an overnight rate with the Fed's path of action with the Fed funds range. So I'll share my screen momentarily and that'll become evident as we see our responses here. But in the world of arbitrage, we just need to make sure that we're adhering to spend down requirements that the IRS has in place so that we can do what we can to help offset potentially any arbitrage liability. So it's a little bit of a brief overview of, I guess, what we do and how we work with the district. Any initial questions before I jump into the snapshot of the response?
And Brett, when you say arbitrage, at a high level, you're referring to we have to spend down that $99 million over specific timeframes. And if we don't meet that spending down requirement, we would have to rebate some of the interest earnings back to the government, correct?
That's correct, yes. So in the world of arbitrage, right, and thanks for that, Steve. So you're borrowing in that tax exempt environment and investing in a taxable environment. So that spread is going to be what's known as arbitrage. And yes, so the IRS has these regulations in place to make sure that the expenditures against bond proceeds flow in a timely fashion and with due diligence. And so they were originally enacted back in the 80s to help prevent issuers from just borrowing dollars and really earning that spread and not paying it back to the local to the federal government. So so let me switch then to share my screen. It says I cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing. Is that something that needs to happen on your end, Steve?
Yeah, Rebecca will do that real quick.
Okay.
Can you check it again?
Yeah, let me try it here. All right, that seems to be working. Thank you.
And Rebecca, could you make Brett a little bit larger?
Sure you want to do that? All right, here we go. Is everybody seeing this screen?
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Rebecca.
And I'll zoom in and out because obviously there's a lot going on here, but just wanted to kind of give everybody a snapshot of what we've seen since closing date on February 1st. So once the proceeds arrive, we have a conversation with Steve and Allie on number one, confirming the receipt of the proceeds here with PMA and WISC, the Wisconsin Investment Series Cooperative. And then also then to looking left to right to talk about the responses that we had, whether it was local banks or other state statute allowable investment vehicles. So what we're looking at here is on February 1st, and I updated this date just because of the fact that we're looking at rates as of yesterday for this conversation, but this was 2/1/23, $99 million arrived. And then we all have these draw dates, which are for the most part tied to the board meeting dates for the district. So the assumption is that you have these investment costs, which are tied to the draw amounts on the draw schedule that were provided. Now, this is one piece of the overall $175 million draw, but going back to our earlier point, we were looking at this dollar amount and knowing what we know with the draw schedule, we were aiming to hit certain spend down requirements. So what those look like would be that of the 99 million, we need to hit spending of 10% by a 6-month anniversary. So they look at it basically from closing date, 6 months out, spending 10% of the borrowing amount plus any interest earned to that date. So by August 1 of 2023, we should see approximately $10 million as allocated to project fund expenditures. And then so they have that test every 6 months thereafter up until the 2-year period of time. So at 1 year, it's 45%. And then the next check-in is at 18 months, and that's 75%. And then finally 100% of this proceeds dollar amount at that 2-year anniversary date. So that's kind of the overlay of what we're working with here when we look at meeting those spend down tests for arbitrage. But then moving left to right, you can see we have monthly interest income based on responses that we've had real time in the market as of yesterday. So this is showing these dollar amounts allocated and invested out to these draw days. And you can see the interest income that would be gained by going forward and investing in state statute allowable investment vehicles that we work with Steve and Allie on. So that's a key in this relationship, in that I'm not taking discretion. This is a teamwork. This is the ongoing dialogue that happens. And here we are talking to you today to present this plan and discuss what's appropriate for the district moving forward. And then ultimately we want to get to that point where we agree upon what you'd like to do moving forward. So without further ado, just moving left to right on what's going on here in this spreadsheet. So once again, you got the interest income, the day count from the date we're looking at here. And then this column shows you the highest net rate per term. And I'll get back to this in a little bit. And then what our proposed fee is per transaction. And so here we're starting columns H and I. These are the more liquid, if you will, of the two investment vehicles that we're considering at this point in time. So this column shows you the WISC, or Wisconsin Investment Series Cooperative, CMS, Cash Management Class Series. So that's daily liquidity up until 11 a.m. for the district, if any funds were to be sitting there. Or the IS, which is the Investment Class Series. So same pool, but really you set aside money for 14 days and then it becomes aged, if you will, or available each business day thereafter, just like you'd have with CMS. So anytime we deploy money in CMS or IS, for the most part, it's liquid and available for the district each business day. So you can see that liquidity and those rates are shown here. What's key for WISC IS, and you'll see this, we're trying to bold or showing you what the proposed investment vehicle would be for each term. So in this near term part of the draw, going out to May of 2023, this is where this is the environment we're living in right now on short-term funds. And this kind of goes back to what I was stating earlier with where the Fed is at, between 4.5% to 4.75%. The WISC multi-class series, or the CMS and IS, is a duration that is fairly short-term. And so this meets the test, I guess, on where we're living at in that investment environment. So that's where we're at here. This next column is the local relationship with one community bank. And so just making sure that they are in a position to take up to $30 million max for all of Waunakee's accounts. And so their rate right now is 4.52, and they're based on the Wisconsin LGIP rate, which just was released earlier this week at a 4.26. So they give a little bit of an extra bump on that, and that's where you guys are at. Steve, did you want to add anything there?
Sure. I think I would just mention that Allie's been working with the one community bank pretty closely over the last couple of months to just share with them where we're going with our investments and managing our property tax revenues that come in, sharing with them where we're going with referendum funds. And they've been an excellent partner for us. But with all banks, there's limitations on what they can collateralize with the entire book of their business. So Allie's been working with them to really clarify, where they could get to for an investment level for all of the district's accounts. And they just confirmed again for her that their bank can go up to 30 million total for providing collateral for all of our accounts. So that would mean Allie would be continually monitoring what's in the payroll account, what's in the accounts payable account, what property tax money's coming in, and working with Brett on balancing out that short-term money to make sure we're not exceeding the collateral amount that they're able to provide us. And their rate is very, very competitive. The rate that they proposed to the school board when their program was accepted is very competitive, which you'll see as we go further to the right. So it's an outstanding program for us, and Allie's working with them pretty regularly to make sure that we're maximizing our opportunity to work with them, yet putting them in a position where they're identifying what they can truly provide collateral for. Thank you, Brett.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Any other questions before I move on here on the remaining part of the response? Hearing none, I'll keep rolling. So columns J through M, so this is where, as I mentioned earlier, this is where we, I think, provide value working with the district, and that Steve and Allie provided us with a local listing or banks that are in the district footprint for us to reach out to in advance of that closing date on February 1st. So, this process had already been in motion after we just, agreed upon the proposed investment plan based on the draw schedule here. And then we let all of the local banks know, okay, please respond to us by that morning of February 1st. Bond proceeds are coming in that day. Let's see what you have to offer. And so this is a snapshot of where those local banks came in. So we had Fortify respond here at a 355. They're willing to take up to 5 million across the board. So that's where they responded in this term from June of this year all the way out to February of 2024. State Bank of Cross Plains came in. They're offering Federal Home Loan Bank letter of credit as collateral backing. You can see their rates are a little bit higher, than Fortify. But once again, I'll come back to this, but I think this is a valuable example to look at when you look at a local response, right, versus where you could conceivably capture additional interest earnings based on what the market's providing you. And then we did reach out to Summit Credit Union and Old National. Both those institutions decided to pass on the opportunity, not that they would not be included in future scenarios moving forward with future borrowings, but they just determined that they would not have a response at this time. And then some familiar names here off under columns N, O, and P with Associated Bank, US Bank, and BMO. So Associated and US Bank certainly responded on multiple terms, as you can see, but rates were not much higher than what we have seen previously here with these other locals. And then what I thought was getting to more of the interesting part of the response on the bank side. BMO did come in and responded with, you can see rates here, kind of out to this part of the curve, and looking at February through May of 2024, and then once again August of 24, locking in some attractive rates longer term in the schedule. And then finally, everyone, you can see we've also got a column here for U.S. Treasuries. So full faith and credit of the U.S. government with those securities. Treasuries are the highest paying for yield as you look at the curve here from 150 days out to just under a year. And then once again out into 2024 for you. There was a government agency here, a Federal Home Loan Bank discount note. Those are much harder to get just based on availability in the market, but we just wanted to show you that it's a state statute allowable investment vehicle and it's available to the district if that's something you'd like to attempt to move forward with. And then finally, we'll become this will become more evident when we look to get our live response again next week, but we'll have more FDIC insured product, national network product from PMA as well. So at this term, there was just over a million that responded at a 477 out to a year term. So this is the dynamic that we work on. This is the conversation we wanted to have here today. Bring forth to everybody the response as we have it, based on, once again, locals and other state statute allowable investment vehicles. Before I guess I open it up or see if there's any other comments or questions, I wanted to go back to this, using this as an example. So if we looked at the March and April of 24 maturities, so looking at both of these draws, if you will, and looking at these day counts, this net rate of 473 is coming from this BMO response, correct? And then we've got the 468 coming from them as well. So that's that highest net rate to that term. So you could conceivably get a little over 417,000 of interest earnings if you lock that in today to those terms. If we said, you know what, we really value this relationship with, State Bank of Cross Plains. They responded to both of these terms. We're looking at 390 and 392. You can see that you're down to $347,000 in interest earnings. And ultimately, that's, if I have that correct, it's about $70,000 difference in interest earnings you're foregoing, keeping funds with a local bank. So, it's those types of discussions, I guess, we want to have and be cognizant of moving forward. We certainly want to, we appreciate local involvement and, want to move forward with those relationships, but also wanted to get feedback on, I guess, what that point would be in time where you're sacrificing X to keep dollars local. So, moving down on this response, though, you can see where we're currently at. Our weighted portfolio yields at a 4.58%. And then it really amounts to just over $4.6 million in interest earnings as of today's date, as we see it on this $99 million borrow. So that's not, once again, it's not for the whole referendum project. This is just this portion, this $99 million borrowing that we're talking about here today.
And Brad, if I could just jump in for a minute on that total that you referenced in column D.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit about this at the facility committee meeting on Monday. So by Wisconsin state law, we cannot take the interest from a referendum project and move it to like Fund 10, which is our general educational fund.
Correct.
So we have that limitation that we cannot just do anything that we would want with investment earnings from a referendum project.
Right.
But what can be done is additional project related expenditures. So when you look at the resolution that the public approved, so what was approved in the resolution, I'll just say as an example, district-wide maintenance and remodeling was in the resolution that the public approved. The board would have the ability, oh, thank you, Brett.
Yep.
You just referenced what the public approved right there. So as an example, the board does have the legal authority to look at investment earnings. And as an example, go deeper down the maintenance list. So as you know, we have an extensive capital maintenance list, and we have a budget of about $6 million towards that list. Interest earnings would allow the board, if you so choose, to spend more on those projects. Another option that's available with interest earnings is to utilize the interest earnings towards the debt. And you can do both. You don't have to just do all one way and all the other. And in the past, we've done both. In the district, when we've had investment earnings and prior referendums, the board has utilized both of those strategies. So just keep in mind, as the interest is earned over time, we have the ability to help on the property tax levy side with the debt. We also have the ability to approve additional maintenance projects. And then I will comment that Allie and I had a chance to have a phone conversation with Jack Heineman, the board treasurer, on this topic. What we were prompting Jack was to have a discussion today about the board's thought process on local banks. It's important for Brett to know, as we put this final plan in place, what the board's overall thought process on that is. Jack was okay with me sharing his perspective, is that a rate in the 3.5 area, in his perspective, even though it's from a local bank, is too low compared to other options that would exist out there. So from his perspective, he would choose to not approve like an investment in column J, because of the differences between J and like what would be available under Q. But then you start getting closer under column K, and the State Bank of Cross Plains was a prior partner of the district, but then Brett shared with you the difference between column K and column P. So BMO Harris has a Waunakee branch. They certainly are a national bank, but they have a presence in the Waunakee community. So you do see that both column K and P are looking at the same term. You certainly could select other options with BMO Harris if your preference was also to look at column K. But the most important thing for the board to weigh in, as administration's working with PMA to finalize this, is what is your perspective on columns, J through P. Joan and Mark, do you share the perspective of Jack that 3.5 is just too far off? Or would you prefer to have a discussion next Monday night with the full board about whether or not they feel we should be looking at like column J? So I think I'm going to turn it over to Mark and Joan to just kind of get your perspectives on this. This is on the agenda for next Monday night. We are looking to approve an investment plan so that Brett and his team then have the ability to execute the investments next week.
Yeah, I'd like to have committees both supporting whatever we're going to present to the board. I know they will have their own say on it, but I think it's important for our committee to identify our preference.
Can I clarify, for BMO, the 4.73, does that indicate they are willing to give us that rate but hold money until that date?
Yes.
Is
Yes.
that,
yep.
And how much money is it? The accumulation, or just how much money are they willing to pay the 4.73? How do I find that in your?
Yeah, appreciate the question. So they responded to this term. So this 4.73 applies to this dollar amount.
Okay, but they would invest that today or whenever we make this decision, and they would hold the money until that date.
Exactly right. So as we look at this, in that example, so you'd have the $3.9 million shown here invested out to this maturity date of February 12th of 24, and that's what interest income you would see. So this would be your investment amount, if you will, and this would be the interest amount that would mature on February 12th of 24. So this 4.157 and change would mature, if you will, or become available to help fund draws on that date in February. And so, yes, in today's market, BMO and all these other institutions are saying, here's what we would provide to you on a fixed rate basis. So this is what we're locking in at today. So long as you hold things to maturity and you don't need to access those dollars earlier, this is what you would anticipate on the interest income return for those institutions.
And with the US Treasury, it works the same. They lock in for just shorter periods of time. And
yeah, the dynamic of play is still the same in that with US Treasuries, you're locking in fixed rates.
yeah,
The nice thing about Treasuries versus CDs, if you will, is that you have a little bit more flexibility with when you look at liquidity. But certainly you're beholden to where the market's at in the future, though. If you needed to access the US Treasury early, you could do that. There's no penalty, let's say, from the federal government on accessing those dollars earlier. You're just beholden to where the market's at on selling that off at that adjusted market value, and then you forego interest earnings to maturity, right? Whereas if you needed to break a CD, let's say going back to that BMO example, not only would you forego the interest earnings from that CD sale date to maturity, but then that institution may have a penalty for accessing those funds early as well. And every bank and financial institution is a little bit different based on what they charge, but certainly there's going to be a heftier charge, right? The earlier you need to grab funds in the schedule.
So, Steve, with our past history of investments for referendums, have we ever had a problem with we needed to withdraw sooner, and so we may have faced a penalty, or is that a remote possibility?
That has not occurred, and the draw schedule was provided by Vogel Brothers. So Vogel looks at the schedule, they know, what they're going to be doing at what time, and they estimate the dollars that go at over those periods of time. So we then share that with Brett, who then builds a schedule around when Vogel is saying. I mean, what would change that is if all of a sudden tomorrow it became 75 degrees and they start construction in 2 weeks and it's a whole month earlier, right? So it would take something pretty extreme for like their planned schedule to construct the school is pretty well thought out and planned. So we feel pretty confident. But on top of that, ultimately, there are liquid funds. So in the event that we ever had larger than expected draws, the One Community Bank program, those funds are available. So they're not sitting locked up for like 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. So we would go there first to pull funds out if we needed them.
Right. And I think it's worthwhile noting that for starters, we're just showing for the most part what the highest rate was per term here. So this, you could switch between CMS and IS or one community bank, right, in this analysis. But going out to May of 2023 is kind of where, in the scenario, the liquidity from these two institutions was forecasted. So that was only just over 4 million. We certainly could go longer term. You're sacrificing a little bit of yield, but once again, the relationship is great here for the district, right, with One Community Bank, and hearing that you've got up to $30 million in overall capacity. You certainly could go further out the curve and give yourself a little bit more flexibility with dollars here as well, right, versus locking in with an agency or treasuries. So there's no hard and fast rule. It's all up to district preference as well on what the comfort level is with liquidity. And we all know that draw schedules certainly don't stay the same throughout the course of a project. So that's something that we want to work with you guys on and arriving at that liquidity comfort level as well on the draw.
From my perspective, I would support using one community as far as we can. Because of our past relationship with State Bank, that's a bit of a drop, but I think it's worth considering. And then I would say fill in the rest with who's ever the highest, whether it's BMO or the U.S. Treasurer.
Okay.
What do you think, Joan?
I agree with Jack. I think the 3.5 is too low to consider. I feel we have, you know, a responsibility when you look at all of our maintenance responsibilities. I mean, this is projects.
Yeah.
I like using one community to the extent we can because of where they're positioned. I guess I would go with the highest after that. You know, I appreciate the business we've had with State Bank. I know they're involved in a big merger right now. I guess I feel we have a responsibility to earn the maximum amount on this money.
Yeah, I can go along with that. Where was Jack?
And we certainly would have a strong local commitment to one community bank, which is the board selected partner. And then as Brett has shown in this example plan, the bold would be an initial thought on where to go. That would result in a second local institution, the BMO Harris, that is in our district, being a part of this as well. So we would have two banking institutions within the community participating. And it's important to know this isn't our only investment process.
Right. I was
There's
wondering.
other opportunities at a later point in time to work with State Bank, Fortify Bank, or any of the others Brett mentioned. Certainly can always reach out again for additional bond proceeds management or throughout the process. So that would be the type of direction that we could use to look at maximizing one community bank and then looking at the highest investment opportunities outside of that, which would lead us to at least one additional institution that is located in the community.
Yeah, because we have more referendum money.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And we will go through this process
Again.
Yes.
Right. Yes. So you want to make a proposal?
Sure. I would make the motion to use one community bank to its maximum and then select where we can have the highest revenue after that.
It's seconded, so.
That's what we will send to the board on Monday.
Okay. Thank you. And then Brett,
Thank you,
just
Brett.
want to explain your process a little bit on Monday and what we'll be looking at the board meeting Monday night.
Sure. So hearing the feedback, you know, we've got our behind the scenes, we've got what we call just our investment bid in our queue. So this information is basically move forward to next Tuesday, if you will. This snapshot will be kind of where we're at. Waiting for approval from the board on Monday night based on this plan. Then we would have this scenario refreshed once again and available to share with Steve and Allie, knowing the constraints of what we're working under here. So looking to, I think, fill in near term where we can place money with one community bank. And then going beyond that, just looking for the highest return that we can get with state statute level investment vehicles. So this whole scenario will be updated. We share that with Steve and Allie, and then look to put put these investments in place, starting as soon as Tuesday morning.
Okay, thank you, Brett.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else from me, or are we good?
It's good seeing you.
Likewise, good to see you, Steve and Allie and everybody. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
So when you get a chance, Rebecca, you could bounce back to the agenda. So then if you want to scroll down, that is the last agenda item. Just know that related to the agenda item we're just referencing, at some point, administration will be asking for feedback on the board on the topic of capital maintenance projects. Once all the board members have an opportunity, of course, to see the interest scenario and what that looks like. Also, we'll be able to see the facility committee's recommendation on completing the process of spending down Fund 41, which is our capital maintenance program. We'll need to have a discussion with the board amongst our Fund 10 capital maintenance project fund, which we're adding 300,000 a year to, and Fund 49, which is referendum money, and what the board's longer term intention would be. Because as I mentioned, the facility committee, we could build up a Fund 10 balance to upwards of 1.8 million by just letting that sit in Fund 10 while shifting maintenance work, all of it, to Fund 49, knowing we have these interest resources available. It would allow the board to potentially consider a strategy of building up a future maintenance pot of money in Fund 10, because we know we can't do that with these investment proceeds. So it's just something to think about over the next couple of months as far as what the long-term plan might want to look like.
Thank you.
That's it for today.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. We'll have to let Jack know we wrapped it up by 9.
Brian, do you have a meeting right after this?
I don't.
You have